So back on our page, on the starting page, we have that background image here at the top. Now it doesn't look that bad, but maybe we can enhance the way it looks like. Maybe you also like this way, but I would prefer if we would see more of that woman and less of the sky. Because actually, if we have a look at our original image here, the freedom image, we see it's way more than just the top left part we're seeing right now. For that, we need to position and size it. Both can be done with the background property if you're using a background image. But that's the first thing I want to dive in. Right now, we always used background either with an image or with a solid color. We use the same notation, but background here actually is just a shorthand. We could replace the background here with background-image, URL freedom.jpg. With that, if I comment out the first line and I go back to the page and I reload it, we see the same as before, because background-image is how we actually set such an image. On the other hand, when we use a solid color, we use background-color and set this to red. And if you would now expect this color to override the image, because it was defined after it, you would be mistaken. If you reload, you see the color flash, but you also see the image. And we have to temporarily remove the image background to see the solid color. Because it turns out you can define multiple backgrounds, only one solid color though. Multiple images are possible, but we'll dive into this later in the module. And therefore, you can create both an image and a color. The image will be in front of the color though. However, here I don't want to have a color right now. Let's go back to that image and let's find out how we can actually size and position it, because this is not really the style I want to have. Now there are more background properties we can use, and for sizing, background size seems to be appropriate. Now background size takes a couple of different values. For example, you can simply set it to 100 pixels. Let's save that and let's see what this results in. If we reload, wow, we see many small images. Now each image actually has a width of 100 pixels, because if we only set one value here, this refers to the width of the image. And by default, it's then repeated. Now we can turn off that repeating or control it with background-repeat. You can set it to no repeat, to, well, don't repeat the image. Now we only got one in the top left corner. Or you set it to repeat X, to only repeat the image on the X-axis. If you now reload, you see there are plenty of images on the X-axis, but only in one row because we don't repeat it on the Y-axis. And on the other hand, there of course also is repeat Y for cases where you do want to repeat it on the Y-axis. I don't see that many use cases where you would need that, but if you do, well, that's how you do it. However, let's set this back to no repeat. And let's increase the width to, let's say, 300 pixels. Now if we reload, we got one bigger image. It doesn't fit into our container though, so this is not the solution I want to end with. Before I dive into the solution that works for us here, let me show what you can do if you set a second value here, let's say to 100 pixels. If you do that, you set the width and the height of the image. If you don't set it, the height is automatically adjusted to keep the aspect ratio. If you do set a value here, the image is forced into these dimensions, so it may very well be distorted. And if we reload here, you see it is in our case, because now the image does not respect, it does not keep its original aspect ratio, it's forced into this dimension or into this width and height we set up here. Now, besides pixel values, you can also set percentage values, like 50% for the width. Now you see, if you reload, that the image actually takes 50% of the available container width. You can also set it to 100%, of course, to take the full width. Now this already looks much better, but just for completeness sake, you could also set the height to 100% and the width to 50, let's say. And if we then have a look at this, now we again have a distorted image, but the height is now fit into the container. And if you don't want to distort it, you can set the first value to auto. Now the width will be set automatically and it will keep the aspect ratio. That, of course, as you can see, leads to the image not occupying the full container in our case, because the container happens to have a different aspect ratio in our app. And for most web projects, this will probably be the case. You rarely have a perfect fit of container and image. Now, these were a couple of solutions. Please note that in the case where we had a width of 100% and a height of auto or undefined, that the image actually takes the full width of the container. It does not overlap to the left or right, but it also does not overlap to the top and bottom, even though there, the image height does not match the container height. The image is automatically cropped. And this is also something we can control. We can control how it is cropped. Before we do that, though, let's also find out one other way of defining the background size. Besides manually setting the width and height, you get some predefined keywords. And a very useful one is cover. Cover, if you reload, essentially does the same as 100% here. So it sets the width to the container width. However, cover does not exactly do that. Cover finds out which part of your container, so width or height, is the important one to be aligned to your image. Put in other words, our image here actually has an aspect ratio where it's wider than it's high. So it has landscape mode. The same is true for our container. So cover automatically finds out that it should set the width to 100% because the height will then have some excess space, because the image, just as the container, has a height that's less than the width. If you had a portrait mode container, the opposite would be the case. Put into other words which make this clearer, cover is a setting that will ensure that your image always fills the entire container. It will even zoom in if your image is smaller than the container. So cover is the best setting if you want to ensure that there never is any white space anywhere in your container. An alternative to this is contain. Contain actually ensures that the full image is visible in the container, because right now the image is cropped. We don't see all the parts of the image. This becomes clear if we reload with the size set to contain. Now you see some additional rocks at the bottom of this image. We also see that now there is some white space on the right, because with contain what happens is that the image actually doesn't fill the entire container, because contain does not make sure that the entire container is filled like cover does. Instead, it ensures that the entire image is possible. And if that means that there is some remaining space in the container, so be it. So contain and cover are two very useful predefined settings which you use instead of manually setting the size in many cases in reality to control how your image is displayed in the surrounding container. Now with both contain and cover, we have the case that we might want to position the image. Because with cover we fill the entire container, but if you watch the rocks again, you don't see them here. Well, maybe you want to fill the entire container, but show less of the sky and more of the, well, rocks of the bottom of our image. This is something we can control with background position. So let's dive into this in the next video.